Hey, sneak peekers, this is Nolan Walley, and I'm with the creative team behind Lawman Bass Reeves. And would you guys want to introduce yourselves real quick?
I'm Chad Feehan. I'm a creator and showrunner.
I'm Christina Voros. I'm a producer, director, and cinematographer.
And I'm Damien Marcano, director.
One of the big questions I think that has to be asked is when you guys are sort of adapting Bass Reeves, what drew you to that story?
Growing up in Texas, I heard stories about bass as a child. They were always akin to the gunslinging lawman pursuing the most hardened criminals in the Wild West, and those stories sort of took root in my consciousness. Then, in March of 2022, David Oyelowo invited me to dinner, explained to me where the myth of the man both converged with and separated from reality. Explained to me some of the things that I didn't know about bass. But more than anything, I was taken with the triumph of the human spirit, which his life so brilliantly captures. And so after that dinner with David Oyelowo, I decided I had to be a part of it, no matter how big or small my role was.
You were talking about how you sort of learned stuff about what is myth and what is real. I'm sure you guys did a lot of like looking into Bass Reeves as this project kind of went through. Is there anything surprising that you learned about him that you didn't know going in?
Yeah, I mean, the stories of my youth were about the lawman. This sort of his origin story was the one that was most surprising to me. To be enslaved, to be forced to accompany George Reeves into the Civil War on the side of the Confederates, to escape enslavement over a dispute over a card game, and then to hide amongst the American Indians in Indian Territory until the end of the war. All that stuff was new to me, and so that was obviously deeply fascinating. The Seminole Nation, who is believed to be one of the, if not the tribe that took bass in, and their history was deeply fascinating to me. So many elements of Bass's life were new to me and deeply fascinating.
For me, I think it was just, I think present day in the world, we're a very reactionary species, the human race. Bass, I watch it in my episodes, I watch it in Christina's episodes, and there's always a moment in the episode where I say, not me. So I am still pretty blown away by 150 years ago, a guy had that much self-control to sort of follow this crazy creed, if you will, that he sort of put upon himself. I mean, we kind of put ourselves in situations. I think people of that era, obviously, of my skin color, didn't put ourselves in the scenario, right? So I think there's always a way to say, I'm going to quit. And I just, as Chad says, like the story about the human spirit and everything, I just think he is or was an unbelievable man that, I don't know, I think we could just learn a lot from him as far as with self-control and sort of setting a plan. Justice sometimes takes long, but it'll happen.
I didn't know Bass Reeves was illiterate, and the brilliance with which he was able to, once he became a deputy U.S. Marshal, with which he was able to capture these people he was after, was testament not only to his talent as a horseman and marksman and an agent of law, but also he had this shape-shifting quality that allowed him to disappear into an environment to apprehend some of the criminals that he was looking for. And, to be able to have a job that is so highly skilled in all those ways, whilst having not been, taught to read the actual warrants that he's being issued, gave me even more respect for someone that I had already heard tales and legends about. I was struck by, and I feel now in watching the series together, that you really start with Bass as a man and you see him become the myth and the legend. And so there are pieces of the legend that I knew, but the pieces of the man that I didn't. And so being able to fill in those blanks has been a real joy.
Earlier, you had talked about how you're sort of from the Texas area, and I know this was primarily, if not only, filmed in Texas. What was that like? Did you guys were you able to handle the heat?
If you would have asked me if I'd be living with my father at 44 years of age 5 years ago, I'd have said you were crazy. But getting to shoot in my backyard, dream come true. Obviously, we had to deal with extreme cold and extreme heat. But, all that stuff just makes the experience, both as filmmakers and as an audience, that much more visceral. And, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. So
You know, I've heard that they say there are 2 seasons in Texas, August and everything else.
Yeah.
I beg to differ. We got about 7 of them.
Yeah.
We had the season of tornadoes, the season of ice, the season of mud,
Yeah.
the season of pollen. But it's such a beautiful place to be. I grew up on the East Coast. I live in Texas now, and if you'd have told me 5 years ago that I get to spend so much time making film and television in this state, I wouldn't have believed you. I'm so grateful to be here and to be taking advantage of everything that the crew base and the locations have to offer.
Yeah. Pretty special here, man. It's when you do productions in a lot of other places, I think just in the Hollywood system in general, I can honestly say Texas is one of a kind, simply put.
We have a lot of film majors who end up watching this at sneak peek, and one thing we like to know is basically what the production process is like. Is there any part of it that you found the most difficult, or just something that you felt like it was an accomplishment to get done?
All of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's Christina made reference to this earlier with respect to David. There were mornings where, I mean, a brilliant actor, brilliant talent, beautiful human being. But there were mornings where I thought, today's the day David's gonna lose it, right? Like he's one thing in the first scene up in the morning. He's doing episode 6 stuff in the second thing up for the day, and then at the end of the day, he's like going back to when he was like enslaved or something. They were just days that I was really thankful, I would say, to have him. But on top of it all, it was just that atmosphere. I think when you look at this at the end, to be very proud of everything we've done, because I said I wanted to mention those days being like that, because at times I don't think, and Christina can tell you, you know you're getting scenes done. You know you're getting scene 1 through 5 done, or you're getting 7 and 12 done of episode 4, and you have no clue if it's all coming together. And in the last week or so, we've all been able to watch her 2 brilliant first episodes, and just to see them come together, the emotional response that I even have as a person who's worked on this, like I've seen it, I saw all her dailies, I saw all that, but I didn't see it all together. And I didn't see it the way it's scored now, and just what it's become. And as she said, I am proud of the entire thing. I'm proud, I'm very prideful at this point in my life to have been a part, just a part of this project.
For young filmmakers or film students, what I would say is, there are 3 things that allow you to get to this stage, and one of them is luck, one of them is talent, and the third is will. The only thing that anybody can control of those 3 is their will, and Texas will challenge your will. But if you never give up, which was a quote that my mom put on my desk when I was a kid, you can get here. So
I'll say something actually I've been thinking about it since you mentioned something in one of the screenings, but one of the things I remember being taught in film school is that as a director, it is the kiss of death to not know the answer to something, right? You're going to get asked to answer 1,000 questions in a day, and if you don't have an answer for each one of those questions, people can smell blood in the water.
Oh, yeah.
Like that, I remember that very clearly. It's only recently that I have come to realize that's not entirely true. And the exception to it is when you are in a creative environment with fellow creatives who you trust and actors who trust you, that you are absolutely going to run into questions you don't have an answer for. And the only thing worse in those situations than not having an answer is having the wrong answer and insisting it's right.
Yes.
That there are moments where you have to step back and go, oh, I didn't think about where the gun goes, or I didn't remember that in the last scene there was this beat that was unanticipated. And if you don't allow yourself to be guided by the impulses of the fellow creators in your environment, to make the wrong decision and stick to it just because you've been taught that as a director, if you don't stick to it, you're going to be considered weak, is a myth. That you have to trust your gut, and if your gut's telling you you don't know the answer and you need help, or if you get inspiration from another source that is not yourself, that changes your perspective, not only is that okay, that's the way you get to the truest version of true.
yeah, I think when you're presented with questions you don't know the answer to, you can always throw it back, which is one way, which works a lot of the time. What do you think? Or when you're collaborating with two extraordinarily talented people like these two, you can say, hey, I don't know. Let's go ask Damien what Damien thinks. And let's go ask Christina what Christina thinks. And so I agree with, I heard that myth in film school as well. And, it's okay to not have the answer.
Yeah.
You were talking a little bit briefly about taking inspiration, not necessarily from crew, but is there any other works that inspired you when making this, either maybe westerns or maybe other depictions of Bass Reeves?
For me, the two that I like to reference is The Revenant. It was important for the three of us to capture something that was both brutal and beautiful, and The Revenant does that exceptionally well. And then a more modern Western, No Country for Old Men, because it wrestles with the theme of justice and the nebulous nature of justice, and it's something that we wrestle with as this show progresses in the later episodes.
Yeah, for me it was the theme of brutal and beautiful. I think ever since I'd met Chad, he had used that term in describing Texas and what we were about to make, and then also just the story. I think you would look at every act of every script, at least that I directed, and I would always sort of find that theme. I wrote it on the front page of each of my episodes. This beauty and brutality. And I think if we, sometimes we all have things that we latch onto, right? So mine wasn't like a film that existed before, but just for the sheer fact, I had never worked with anyone that told me those are the two words I want to center on. And I thought it was so exceptional because I think life, even right now, some of us are very blessed. We are now in an industry where a lot of people are striking or whatnot, and I'm sure to a degree every human life has a bit of beauty and a bit of brutality, right? And it's how we all handle it. So when I mentioned the man that he was and this character was, I was really intrigued with figuring out how does this guy stay who he is and stay his course in a beautiful and brutal world.
We talked about a lot of different movies in the process of pre-production. One of the things I was struck by in this show is, which had never happened to me before, more as a DP even than as a director, but once you do all this prep and you have all these ideas, but it's very different once you get into the location, once you get into the space, into the room, once you see the wardrobe and everything come together. And as the show went along, I started to take visual inspiration from the performances that were happening. Later in the season, I found like the cinematography got darker when the story got darker. And I'd never had the writing or rather not just the writing, but the performance of the writing that was emerging over the course of doing the project start to actually push the edges of where it wanted to go visually. It was an incredibly organic process. I don't think you can, I don't expect every project to be like that. I actually think it's quite rare. But when you have an artist like David Oyelowo who has done so much searching to find these very, very detailed edges of this character, it can start to change the way you actually see that person and want to change the way the light obscures them or holds them out into the open. And I just never had that experience before as a DP.
You had talked a little bit earlier about the strikes that are happening right now. I'm pretty sure this show was in production during when the writer's strike started, and then editing is when the actor's strike started. Did that have any issues on set going with those guidelines or anything like that?
Yeah, I would just like to bring up a very towards the end, and I mean I already have extreme respect for our entire cast and crew. But I remember the day when Chad and Jacob had to come to like an entire town that we rebuilt and say their goodbyes, and we weren't done yet, right? And as I told you, I had latched on to words he had given me, so you find yourself all the way at the end, and it's like finish line jitters. You're like, okay, I'm about to finish. And then, poof, this happens. And so your confidant, the person that you literally just bump and say, hey, man, I was reading this last night. What do you think about that? Or is this what you meant? Gone. All right? Gone. Like, and, there's many times I think when I direct that I get my blinders on and I just like, writers probably think I don't even want to know what they're thinking because I'm so focused on the pages, right? But there's always a moment of the day. There's always a moment. There's always, I'll give myself that. There's always a line I misread and I'm like, now it makes sense. All of a sudden your encyclopedia is gone. The person that gave you everything that you were inspired by is gone. The next person, if he's not around, is also gone. And left in place is, a brilliant assistant who probably is just one of the best assistants I've ever met in Mackenzie. And, I remember talking to her and I was like, I don't know how we're going to get through this, but I tried to give her sort of like a crash course on being Chad. Like how to kind of stay and because she was the eyes and ears after he left. And to me that was just sort of the biggest thing of this industry, the carpet being sort of pulled out from under us. It was just, we're doing something that we all have found this purpose in. I think 9 out of 10 other shows we'd all been like, it's a strike, I'm gonna finish up these last 2 pages and then we'll be done. But this one I would say, and it was on, I won't give any plot lines, but it was on a very, very important day that I saw this man have to walk away. And he did it in a fashion which was to not affect our production. And there were a lot of other people that I've known in this business that didn't do the same thing for much lesser projects. So when it happened, I think we all just kind of banded together all a little bit tighter. And it was kind of like, not calling you dad, but it was like, dad's gone. And we all gotta, we gotta get together. Like this is the true way to test this family at this point, right? It's like the head's gone now. So we gotta figure out how are we holding this together? How are we going about it? And still asking all the questions that we would ask if he were present.
I think we were lucky enough to be left with a really strong roadmap in the scripts, and having been working in such lockstep up until that point, that we'd been taught how to read the roadmap.
Yep.
And so it felt like it was awful. To be honest, that's not like, there's no poetic way to put it. It was awful. Imagine a 3-legged stool and somebody pulls the one of the 3 legs off, and it's not a stool. You're just teeter-tottering, and thank God, I think, the cast and crew and Damien and I just tried to batten down the hatches and keep sailing, because we knew where we were supposed to go. But it was heartbreaking.
Yeah. Very tough. Yeah. Very tough to leave. But the right thing to do, and had long conversations with both of them before I left, and felt the utmost confidence in their ability to carry across the finish line.
We have one last question. You guys obviously wouldn't know this, but I was actually a production assistant on this show. I was filming this, or I was helping, obviously, around May 31st or so.
Okay.
And this was one of the best opportunities I got. This was sort of my first time on a professional set. It was a great opportunity. Do you have any advice to anybody watching this on what opportunities they should be looking for?
I would say that, I'd say just listening to your story, I always find advice in just hearing people's journeys. And I find I have worked with I always have a joke in this business where I say, he's our PA today, he could be our producer next season. And it is sort of the ground level, right? It's sort of where we get in at, and you are able to not just see one part of the set, but sort of see it from a whole. I think if you get in a specific department, obviously if that's your passion, you go for it. But if you are sort of curious and maybe you're just like, I want to be in this, I think PAing is a great start, man. I think that's just simple advice I would start with.
I'd say be humble and kind, because to your point, I've seen people who were PAs who I then worked with as a producer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And being a PA is one of the hardest jobs on set. And you take a lot of flack, and you work the longest hours, and you get paid the least, and you get the least amount of respect and ask for the least amount of input. So understandably, people don't want to stay a PA any longer than they have to get to the next step. But we all start somewhere, and you don't know. It's not be nice because that person could be your boss someday. It's be nice because this job is hard.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you're a huge movie star or big executive producer, or if you're running craft services. Like, if we don't take care of each other, no one else is going to. And all of our work is hard. And so I think if you don't go into set every day without, it doesn't matter where your name falls on the call sheet, you have to treat everyone with the same level of respect and understanding for the amount of effort they're putting into the work. And if you don't do that, I promise you, it's not just about being a good person. It will come back to you, because people remember that sort of thing. And you will have a long, happy career as long as you take care of people the way you want yourself to be taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you got to love this to do it. You can want to do it to be famous. You can want to do it to be rich. You have to do it because you love storytelling. And if you love storytelling, take whatever opportunity you can get by the horns. Be humble, be kind, and work your ass off. And just keep searching out opportunities, and eventually you'll start to move where you want to go.
Yeah, that's all the questions I had. Thank you guys so much.
Awesome.
For your time.
Thank you, guys.
man. Really appreciate it.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah, you too, man.